Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the Design It Yourself Native Plant Landscape webinar tonight. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Andrea Papajohn. I'm with the city of Millbrae, and we are sponsoring this along with BOSCA, Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. So for tonight's webinar, we encourage all y'all to ask questions. There's a couple ways to do it. One is you can, you can raise your hand, and then what we'll do is we'll unmute you at the end to ask questions, or you can go to the Q&A and put them in there, and I'm happy to read them at the end as well. So just a bit about BOSCA in case you're not familiar with it. So the city of Millbrae is one of the 26 agencies that BOSCA represents. And BOSCA actually purchases water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. The member agencies provide water to like over 1.8 million people and 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. And BOSCA's goal is to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price. So the objectives, and one of the reasons we hope you're here, is to reduce or conserve water. And obviously one of the biggest water usage is outdoors. And so there's a great opportunity to conserve water, and we'll learn some ways to do that during the webinar. Some additional ways to save. I just want to mention a couple other rebate programs through BOSCA, in case you're not aware. If you have a current irrigated lawn, there's a Lawn Be Gone program that you can actually get paid to transform your lawn into something more drought tolerant. There's also a rain barrel rebate program. And so you can get the runoff water from your roof into a rain barrel so that you can use for later for outdoor use. And there's also a smart controller, a smart irrigation controller program from Ratio. And I think it's $100. So it's a great deal, especially as we're heading into the summer months. It'll be dry. And an optional rain garden rebate program. So if you're interested in any of these, you can go to bayareaconservation.org and apply. And in some cases, upload your receipt and receive rebates. And just a few upcoming webinars. There are 3 listed here. Prepare to irrigate efficiently this summer on May 22nd. A family workshop on how to grow your own salad on May 29th. And irrigation equipment upgrades and leak detection on June 7th. So we hope you can join us for some of those. Again, you register at bayareaconservation.org. And I'm not sure I mentioned, but that we are recording this, and you'll be able to review the information later too, if you'd like. And one other resource is bayareagardening.org. So it provides a lot of information on water efficient landscape. Okay, so now I am very happy to introduce our expert speaker, Juanita Salisbury. We're very happy to have her present tonight. So I will let her take it away. Thank you, Juanita.
Okay, thanks, Andrea.
Sure.
All right, so share my screen here. Okay. All right, let's pull these into the slideshow from the beginning. All righty. Well, thanks, Andrea, for that. And let's get right into it with our Design It Yourself native plant landscape. My name is Juanita Salisbury. I am a California registered landscape architect, and I'm also a psychologist slash scientist by training. I have a PhD in biopsychology, and that biopsychology degree looked at studying the physiology and behavior of ingestive behavior, that is eating and drinking. And that now is incorporated into my design expertise, looking at these native plant gardens, and we'll see how that is relevant to designing a garden. I do take care of some public gardens here in Palo Alto, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, or our YouTube channel, Primrose Way. As I mentioned before, I do take care of 5 public native plant gardens here in Palo Alto, and they're always open. So if you're interested in seeing what some of these plants look like out in the real world, how big they get, when they bloom, what they look like all during the year, come and take a look. There's 5. This is Embarcadero Road here in Palo Alto, and the Primrose Way Garden is the furthest east. Further down on Embarcadero Road is the Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden. And up on Newell Road, we go to the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden. And then as we cross Channing Avenue, there's Arcadia Place, which is a little cul-de-sac garden. And then in between Hamilton and Edgewood is the Island Drive Pollinator Garden. So tonight I'm going to talk about function-based design. As a landscape architect and designer, I always like to have a reason for what I put into a design. I don't just make things up or decide on something based on a whim. I always have a reason for doing things. And these days, my design is being guided by function of everything. What do they do? What do things do in the environment? So we'll talk about what that means and how to measure and do some placement of things to really get that professional looking design. I'll have a few design tricks for you. And then of course, because we're doing gardens with native plants, we'll talk about planting, and that incorporates a lot of different issues about native plants. What is their function basically? And then we'll talk about maintenance. It's not just one thing to plant something and forget it. You have to maintain it because it is a living organism. And so there's some interaction that's involved with that. So let's jump right into function-based design. Basic design consideration here, you probably heard the expression form follows function. And what I like to do is I like to list the functions for the spaces that you want. I'm assuming that you're probably starting from maybe scratch here. And so let's start with the functions of the spaces that you want outside. So function, what do we mean by functions? What are you doing out there? Are you barbecuing? Are you looking for areas to dine outside, to sit around a fire pit perhaps? Do you have a rain garden? And then your house. And so think of the spaces as outdoor rooms with hallways, walls, and floors, with the sky as the ceiling, and then do some freehand bubbles, which we call the bubble diagram, to see how these spaces relate to each other. So obviously the barbecue relates to dining, so these are closer together. And then use these double-ended arrows here to kind of get a sense of the circulation between the functions. And once you have these functions listed, you kind of get an idea about the circulation, movement between the areas. And once you have this, and the form just sort of follows from this. And you also want to be thinking about ways you can use function to reduce irrigation and water use in the landscape. So take that bubble diagram, put it aside for a minute, but you want to measure your site. And what you'll do with your site measurements is you'll create an accurate to scale base map. And I like to use graph paper to show the area. And you can have 1 square equaling 1 foot, which makes it pretty easy to measure. And this is what graph paper looks like. It's just a piece of paper with squares on it. And then show which way north is. And I always like to enliven my slides with pictures of insects that I see in the garden, and there's a reason for that. This is a beautiful little leaf cutter bee, one of our native bees on a annual flower, Gilia capitata. Now, when you're measuring for your landscape plan, and measuring is so important, having a plan is the start. Always have a plan. This is how you get things done. It's not a lot of arm waving. You actually have a piece of paper that shows things. So let's say you're measuring your site. You want to note everything from retaining walls, fences, raised decks. And when I say measuring, and I talk about using a soft tape, so a soft tape is one like this one here in the middle that's on a reel, and this one's about 300 feet long. I usually pull these out and leave them in place while I measure things along them. A couple of soft tapes will save you a lot of headaches. And also note things about your house too, like downspouts, any sort of utilities, hardscape areas, and so forth. So when you're drawing a map to scale, and don't be afraid to draw a map to scale. It's actually just super easy to do. Again, use your graph paper and then lay out your base tapes. So this base tape here is being shown with this red arrow as a base tape. And I usually start from one fence line and pull it straight across the back of the house, if we're doing a backyard, all the way to the other fence line. If I line it up with the house, that way I know it's straight. And then we measure from the beginning all the way over. So 0 here with a little arrow showing which way I'm going over to the fence line, which is 70 feet, 4 inches from the start. And then I pull another tape in the opposite, or in the 90-degree direction, using the side of the house to line it up to make sure that it's straight, and then measure along that one. So again, take inventory of your space. Note where your trees are, where your edges of lawn, hardscape, which means patios and walkways, decks, and so forth. Any existing lighting, electrical outlets, any other notable features, and so forth. So once you have this drawn, this is a scale map. So this will be what you're going to use. And then, super easy, take a piece of tracing paper. It's just a piece of translucent paper, put it right over the top of your map, which is already to scale. So I think the size of those squares was about 1/8 of an inch. So this is 1/8 of an inch equals 1 foot. And then remember that bubble diagram. Okay, remember that fire pit, remember the dining and the barbecue. Do an outline of your house, and it doesn't have to be fancy. Use a big old Sharpie to outline your house. Show where the doors are, which way the doors are swinging. These are swinging outwards, where your windows are. And then show with your Sharpie the circulation between these areas. So this is what we call the site-based functional diagram. So it's actually taking those functions and putting them on the sites. And then it's very, very general. So it's not specific. This is not something that you can build from just yet, or plant from. And then, I like to differentiate these function areas with just some red pencil. And again, the black Sharpie showing movement between areas, and then blobby green areas showing areas for planting. Okay, so that kind of gets the two areas separated, starting with the function. Now, this is the design tricks that I wanted to just mention briefly to get that really professional look to your landscape. This is assuming that you may be rethinking of doing some hardscape or patios or shapes of planting beds, whatever it is. What really works for selling a design, and this is a secret, designer's secret, is to have a really beautiful composition. And So consider the overall composition, and there are some tricks to getting a really harmonious design. And some things are just simply to line up edges of things, to use a sort of um, a just a sort of midline between things. You can have middle lines and showing intersections, but things are kind of lined up this way. And that kind of harmonizes the shapes in terms of where they are. And the other thing that you'll want to do is repeat elements. So this particular square, it's repeated exactly the same way, but then again, it's repeated another time as something larger. So variations on a scale. Same with this arc. This is repeated in these little arcs. So that's a trick to getting a harmonious composition. You want to avoid those acute pie-shaped angles, which are maintenance nightmares. If you do have angles, you want them to be wider. 90 degrees is always a handy thing, but you really want to avoid those little pointy acute angles because they are not easy to take care of in terms of like hardscape or planting beds. Don't have sort of like random wishy-washy curves. Have some nice arcs and tangents. It just looks clean and crisp. It looks much more professional. But really, this is about 4 years of landscape architecture in one slide. Okay, so you decided on your form. Think about forms that work for your situation. Throw another piece of tracing paper over the top of that site-based functional diagram, and you can still see through. You can see there's the fire pit area, and then start working your form in. Remember, form following function. So steps down from the door, patio area for the fire pit, dining area over here, little barbecue area. So it starts to fall together. I mean, if you do follow function, it just is like a step-by-step approach that your design will emerge from that. And then very generally, once you have the hardscape figured out, then start showing some planting areas. First, show places where you can put some trees, and the trees are these circles with the big fat trunk here shown in the center. So very generally, throw another piece of tracing paper over the top of that one. So you know, just like your fourth piece on the top. Start to show some perennial masses, larger shrubs in masses like this, and then smaller perennials towards the front of these planting beds. Pretty easy to kind of get a sense of where things might go. We'll be more specific about what those things might be when we start talking about plants very specifically. You want to make sure that your dining table is going to fit, so you can also measure that too. And which we did. We measured the table and the chairs here with a 1/4 inch graph paper. You can see here's my measuring tool here with a 1/4 inch there. So make sure your furniture is going to fit on the sizes. That's what a refined concept looks like. Again, not saying exactly what the plants are, but again, form following function, you can get a very professional looking design by following that really super easy tip. Okay, so now that we've figured out how to design things, let's talk about plants, because we're looking for ways to reduce water use, but maybe we're also looking for ways to help the planet. And we like using native plants because they do some very special things in the environment, which we'll build to that revelation in a second. So this is what I call my photons to protein slide. Plants are the beginning of everything on the planet. They are the primary producers of food and the basis of food chain. So energy from the sun gets transformed by plants into floral and vegetative resources that other organisms eat. There's no other way that the sun's energy can be passed through the food chain. It has to go through plants first. No other way. And so you have things like caterpillars. There's a big fat caterpillar on a Gryndelia. There's my hand. I was very excited to find this because that becomes food for baby birds. And nice, smooth, hairless caterpillars are the preferred food for baby birds. And when you think about animal species on the planet, 37% of our animal species are plant-eating insects. And as a rule, and this is very key here, native insects, the ones that have been here for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, only eat the native plants that they evolved with because they like the way that the chemicals taste. No, they have relationships with the chemicals in plants that are very specific, and they need those plants in order to grow and turn into other things like butterflies and moths. And so we have these plants that are getting eaten by caterpillars, which turn into butterflies and moths. But the things that spread those plants around in the environment are pollinators. And the pollinators then play a key role in helping other animals access the sun's energy by spreading around genetic diversity of those plants. So this is where the ingestive behavior comes in, my scientific background. I see plants as very pretty. I love pink flowers and fragrant flowers. That's their decorative aspect, but they're really food. They're not really decorations. Their actual function, remember we're talking about function here, is that plants are food. This means that when you use native plants in your garden, you will attract pollinators and other insects that will eat them, guaranteed. And in return, this will attract birds. It will happen. It's like magic, but it's not. It's just nature. So native plants are critical parts to sustaining life. And this is how I choose plants in the nursery. I always look for the ones that have been chewed on because I know that it's supporting an organism that is already in the environment. So why is it important to see native plants as food? Because native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects, it's best to avoid making your garden an ecological sink or a trap. An ecological sink is something in the environment that attracts organisms, and because of this attraction, makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. So it's kind of like inviting all your friends to dinner and then killing them. Don't want that to happen. So think of bees as farmers, like this beautiful black-tailed bumblebee here, whose function in the environment is to spread this genetic diversity of the plants for other insects to eat. So this makes the function of pollinators, the bees in the environment, a keystone species, which means many hundreds or thousands of other species depend on their behaviors. So why are native plant gardens so great? Because they enhance connectivity and complexity in the landscape. This leads directly to enhanced biodiversity and resilience in the environment. So the more connected and complex your garden, the more the plants support each other, leading to reduced irrigation needs. Plants like community. Less water use doesn't necessarily mean less plants. As you add more plants to your garden, you build a community of plants that support each other, share water, and they share nutrients and information with each other. So imagine all these native plants where it's a machine and you're adding different parts, in this case, plants. And at a certain point, that garden becomes a self-assembling living machine. And it happens with the more plants that you add, the more community and the more support these plants have, and the less water they will use because they're sharing resources. They like being with other plants. Sometimes plants, people say, I planted this one thing and it didn't live. Well, it's because it was lonely and didn't have any friends to help support its life. So things in the environment that help support complexity and help trap moisture. There are a lot of different things. Plants certainly hold moisture. If you have a swale or a rain garden where there's like an indentation in the ground that helps water be directed underground, that water then is pulled up by the tap roots of certain trees. Some of it's released into the air for cloud formation, which cools the atmosphere and does lots of other good things. But there are also these lateral roots that interconnect with all these other plant roots, and they're all having a conversation with each other. So if this tree gets attacked by predators, all the other plants will know because they are connected underground and they are communicating. You can trap moisture using rocks underground, piles of leaves, leaves and twigs. If you have plants that spread by runners, those runners will go towards the moisture, guaranteed, because moisture is life, water is life. So that's just a quick way of looking at how to enhance the connectivity. So, but why California native plants? California, yay, is a biodiversity hotspot, one of only about 30 on the entire planet. We have almost 8,000 species of native plants here in California, some that are found nowhere else on the planet. We have more plant species than any other state in the United States. And we also have 1,600 species of native bees, more than any other state in the United States. Across the United States, there are 4,000 species of native bees. Honeybees are not native. I'm not going to talk about those. But we have such a huge number of native plant species, largely because of our unique ecosystems in California, everything from redwood forests to coastal prairie areas to oak savannas to deserts. And the other part is because of our 1,600 species of native bees. Remember, bees' function in the environment is to move those genes around so that the plants then become more diverse. And it's super important to use these plants because the plants are food for the insects that they evolved with, and insect species, including pollinators, are declining worldwide. In some places of the world, they have declined up to 70%. This is not good because about 90% of flowering plants on the planet need pollinators, and we don't want to lose 90% of our flowering plants on the planet. So super important to use native plants. So what do you plant? Now that you've got your professionally looking designed landscape, you've got these planting areas ready for your trees, your shrubs, your perennials, etc. What do you plant? Where do I go to find the right plants? Well, California has the California Native Plant Society, which has an amazing database to use. And I took a screenshot of that particular database. This is Calscape, and it's a super easy to use searchable database. It provides lots of information and resources. You can find California native plants and research any plants that might qualify for rebates. And then from this database, you can create a plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, and succulents that you can use in your garden. And so they have a little about Calscape, which I would definitely look at. You can contact them. The planting guide, which is, it goes into a lot of detail about how to plant up these areas. Nurseries, where can I find these plants? You can create nice Excel spreadsheets of your plants that you choose, and the butterflies that feed on these plants. I'm going to say cancel because I don't want that. There we go. Hate it when those notifications pop up. Anyway, 7,990 plants native to California, and you can search by location, or you can search by plant name, and they have it broken down into all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, and so forth. But here comes the food intake again. A better question, really, instead of what to plant, is who to feed. And we know that plant species need insects, the pollinators, to survive, because those 90% of flowering plants needing pollinators, we know that. Okay, so who do we feed? Remember that the pollinators are spreading plant species for butterfly and moth larvae, those caterpillars. So the best way to choose plants is to find a place. You can search by county or the state or your city, whatever, and they'll show you the number of plants that you have in that area. But you can also find the butterfly and moth species that feed on those plants. So in California, we have 1,368 butterflies and moths that are native to California, and it talks about what the host plants are, what they eat. And some plants have a lot of insects that feed on them. And those are the plants that you want. So if you really want to get some bang for your buck in terms of feeding the most animals, get a plant that is a keystone that provides food for a lot of other species. That's amazingly critical and has magical consequences when you plant it. Your garden will come alive. And what we know then, because that when we have pollinators flying around spreading genes, is that speciation in plants, where you have variations in color over time, that happens much more quickly when you have pollinators working, rather than things that are wind pollinated, things that create lots of pollen and just blow it around, hoping that it lands on the right plant. So we know that these biological factors then are much more important considerations than abiotic factors, the things that don't really have anything to do with biology, like climate, geology, and water, for determining what to plant. Think about plants first as supporting organisms that are already present in the environment, because when you're supporting those organisms, you are supporting everything up the food chain, including humans. Okay, but you still want to have some low water use plants. And how do you find out how much water plants use? Like just about everything these days, there's a website for that. And the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species is an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species, and is published by the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Department of Water Resources. No surprise there. And you can rank plants based on the percent of water use of turf grass. And that's the reference against which their water use is measured. So the percentage of that reference is called the plant factor. And so let's say you want something that uses almost no water, and the plant factor there is 0 to 0.1, or about 10% of what a lawn would use. Okay, and then it has low, medium, and high. So you can really rank those and double check to that you're really getting something that's using not very much water. And most California species that that are living specifically in our area are not real high water use, because unless you live on a place where there's underground, like a artesian well or a seep or something like that, or in a drainage area, most plants are going to be pretty low water use. So again, what do you plant? How do you start now? You think, how do I organize my behavior? Okay, so we're going to start with those keystone species. And the keystone plant genera, they form the backbone of other habitat resources: food, shelter, and nesting sites. Remember, I said that keystone species help other plant species to survive and other organisms to survive. So the plants that provide food for dozens or hundreds of caterpillars, and upon which countless other animals depend, is the way that you want to go. If you have a choice between this plant and that plant, see which one feeds the most species. The one that feeds the most is, if it fits for your site, that's the one that you want. So the sequence: start with large things first. So figure out what trees you want first. Some people say, well, I just don't want to tackle my entire yard. An easy way to start is to plant a single tree and create a planting bed around it. Okay, it doesn't have to be a whole, landscape blowout thing. Don't get overwhelmed. Start with a tree first, or as many trees as possible first. Big ones, little ones, trees of all sizes. Trees like to be in groups. The roots will really hold together. In fact, people say, well, won't the oaks blow over? No, the oak will blow over, but a lot of oaks together, because their roots are holding each other up, they're more sturdy than that single oak blowing in the wind. So once you figure out the trees that you want, then your shrub layer should be comprising more than 60% of all of your plants. So as many shrubs as possible. And then in the remaining spaces, fit in grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, and ground covers, vines. So look for a mix of herbaceous and woody perennials. And what we mean by herbaceous, there are some plants that really get huge over the summertime, and then at the end of the season, they completely wither up and disappear. That's what we mean by an herbaceous perennial. Not a problem, they will come back. That's just their life cycle, but you want to have a lot of other evergreen shrubs to kind of maintain the forms in the garden and a lot of greenness. Evergreen plants keep their leaves throughout the entire season, entire year. They don't drop their leaves all at once like deciduous plants do. And then while you're waiting for things to get bigger, use some annual plants, plants that can be easily grown from seed and go through their life cycle in a single year. So they can provide easy color and help fill up the seeds in the soil and keep coming back year after year as you're waiting for shrubs to grow. And here's a picture of a garden that I'm working on as a little art project where I just sowed a packet of these tidy tips. This poppy seeded itself in there. And this has been very popular with the butterflies and the bees. Beautiful plant, and has really gone blooming, still blooming now. I think it's been blooming for almost 2 months. So a lot of bang for my buck for a packet of seeds. Again, start with your keystone trees, and oh my goodness, that looks like an oak. That's because it is an oak. We like oaks, but we also like trees because trees help save water. This is why I say start with trees first. They absorb the water, release it into the air, cooling and cleaning it. We need cool, clean air, especially when hopefully the fire season won't be bad this year, but having moisture in the atmosphere helps, and trees form half of that rain cycle. So they pull the water up and release some of it into the air. And when we talk about the water cycle, you probably remember from grade school the picture of the ocean with the mountains on the side, the cloud forming over the ocean, moving to the mountain and then dropping the rain. That's one half of the water cycle. The other half is from trees. Trees perform so many ecological functions for us. They help improve water quality by filtering rainwater, slowing down impacts of heavy rain, which hopefully we'll get again someday. And they reduce flooding and help stabilize soil. So they can really provide a lot of ecosystem services. So one of the best trees, this is for Santa Clara, but for probably San Mateo County as well, Quercus Labota, or the valley oak. No other trees come close to delivering all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. If you don't have room for a big oak, try a small scrub oak, which is more shrub sized. Again, you'll get a lot of the same benefits, but you won't have a massive tree in your yard. Here in Santa Clara Valley, the valley oak, which is shown here at the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden, this really forms the anchor in this garden. It used to be 61% of the tree cover in Santa Clara Valley, and now is sadly only 1%. So I'm trying to plant as many valley oaks as possible where I can. They are a keystone species. They are deciduous. That is that they will drop all their leaves once a year, and those leaves need to be left in place underneath the tree to help support the health of the tree. And valley oak leaves are ecosystem gold for what they do in the ecosystem. You can plant native plants underneath of an oak, like Monardella, otherwise known as coyote mint. And you want native plants under oaks that use very little water. Non-native plants can actually adversely affect the health of the tree, so plant things that go under oaks naturally. These trees are insect factories, so they are sunlight transformers in a huge way. The valley oak lives up to 600 years and adds so much value to real estate. So again, valley oaks, and plant them small, they grow very quickly to a nice big fat tree. Second after your trees, choose your keystone shrubs. And what you want to do is, I I did a search here by San Mateo for San Mateo County, showing 71 shrubs native to San Mateo County, and then rank those by the number of butterflies and moths hosted, and then choose what will fit for your size, in terms of size for your location and what your water needs are. Third, once you're filling up your plant palette with trees, shrubs, and then perennials. Go nuts on the perennials. I like to put in as many as possible. These are just a few of the perennials that we have in our gardens. And here's a beautiful bumblebee on Scrophularia californica, otherwise known as bee plant, aptly named. Then, add annuals. Annuals are great. They provide a huge variety of floral resources if you really want to feed a lot of creatures. Annuals are the most under threat natives from competition from non-native grasses, and a huge variety that you can't find in nurseries, easily grown from seed. You get a lot of easy color. So a packet of seeds is pretty affordable. There's a long bloom time, as I mentioned. If you do some successive sowing, like sow seeds every couple of weeks, you can extend the bloom time, and a lot of them will reseed in place. And so you'll end up with more seeds than you know what to do with, and they'll keep coming back year after year. You can put them under taller shrubs, you can grow them in pots, and seeds preserve genetic diversity. Very important to do that. After all, if we're looking at function, again, function, what is it doing? If we're looking at the function of pollinators spreading genetic diversity, we don't want a lot of things that are all clones of each other, because then the bees are not doing their function appropriately. They're not optimized in their function. 3 easy ones that I've used: poppies, we all know, California state flower; Gilia capitata, beautiful blue flower, super easy and very, very seedy. And then Phasalia Tanacetifolia. It's in the borage family. Borage is one of those plants that has really high nectar. A lot of Phasalia species, but super easy to grow. And you get to see all these beautiful little creatures doing their thing, and your garden will come alive. Another great annual, I love using this one, Clarkia Ammona. I mean, this was just a seed packet I literally tossed onto the ground at the Primrose Garden, but look how pretty it is. I mean, you got some pink and white flowers here, some beautiful burgundy ones, pale colors with these beautiful nectar guides showing the way to the good stuff for the bees. I mean, who wouldn't want these? They're just so lovely and fresh looking. If you can't afford a lot of plants, and I'm of this ilk myself, I raise things from seed because seed gives you an opportunity to really get to know the life cycle of a plant. And so there's a method I like to use called cold stratification, where you literally take a seed, take a coffee filter, label it with indelible ink of what the seed is, wet it down, stick your seeds in it, put them into a Ziploc bag and stick it in the refrigerator. Check it every few days to see when a root tip emerges, and then plant it up. And you'll save yourself thousands of dollars by growing your own plants. Super easy to raise things from seed. Again, as we're looking for ways to reduce the outdoor irrigation, we know that outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. Reconsider that lawn. We do have native sod blends that we can use that use about 1/3, but really, again, use function-based decision-making. What are lawns used for? Lawns are a lot of work. You got to mow them, you got to weed them, they take water, you have to fertilize them. And if you mow intensively, you'll actually increase the amount of weeds and lawn pests that you have in the lawn. So, and really, where is everybody in this party? They're all standing around watching the one person running around on the lawn. Okay. So again, function. Do you really need this for that particular function? Try something else instead of something like a sod lawn, use a ground cover. You know, one easy one that I like to use is a Ceanothus horizontalis, Yankee Point. Super easy, uses almost no water, doesn't really like to be watered during the summertime, maybe once a month, a deep watering, and then you're good to go. So super low water use, and look how pretty that looks. Stays green all year. So people always ask me, so, can you give us a plant list? And I'm not going to go through everything here, but if you want to later, you can come back to this slide and look at some of the plants that I have labeled and where I put things. So here's a plant that says Eriogonum. This says Salix. This says Ceanothus. Wait. Yes, it says Ceanothus, Heteromeles, and so forth. So this is an example of the species that I would try to use in a garden to get started, which I like use as my go-to plants. Again, this looks very complex, very naturey, and just a really wonderful combination of plants that will all support each other. When you're planting, how do you place the plants? So in your planting areas, consider first putting in some pathways for maintenance so you can get through and water things to establish them. Then start, remember you've got your graph paper here, so you can start showing your plants from your plant palette as circles at their mature diameter. And that will help you with spacing. So then once you space things out, so like along the edge of a pathway here, where the circles are touching or overlapping a bit, that will give you the number of plants that you use. So, and you want to plant in masses because masses, at least for the smaller things, really give you a lot more visual impact. And then the larger trees and shrubs, you don't need as many of each one. If you have a large shrub, that might be enough, that particular one. But I like to use odd numbers for massing because it just looks more natural. Again, place your large trees first, then your shrubs, then layer in perennials, vines, bulbs, and succulents. Don't feel like you have to get everything in all at once. Start with your big things first and your shrubs first, and then over time, add things. Don't feel like you have to completely fill out your plant palette. Gardens evolve over time, and with almost 8,000 species of plants, there's plenty to explore and find and really enjoy going on the hunt for these plants at the various nurseries. So once you have everything in, how do you maintain this? And I will say that native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. Once everything is established, it's literally less maintenance because you don't have to mow a lawn. Most of your work is keeping weeds at bay, and that will actually get less over time because the plant roots will exude a hormone that invites other native plants but does not invite non-native plants. So over time, the weeding for non-native plants will go down. You want to irrigate your plants to establish them when they're first planted. And I like to plant during the rainy season when it's nice and cool. It's much easier to establish a garden when it's cool. We're almost out of the planting window now. It's still fairly cool, but that's probably going to change within the next few weeks. And as you're irrigating to establish these plants, you want to encourage those roots to search for water because they will look for it. So water deeply just outside of the root ball about once a week is all I need. People say, how much water should I put for a deep watering? If something came to you in a 5-gallon bucket container, give it 5 gallons of water, around the outside. People say, well, how do I know what's 5 gallons of water? So get a measuring can or a thing and just like put your hose on and time how long it takes to fill up a gallon and then water for that amount of time. Prune sparingly. Pruning is highly overrated. I hardly ever prune the gardens, only usually to keep branches out of the pathways. Maybe not even that. You don't have to fertilize them. I amend very sparingly. If the soil is very heavy clay, I'll use a cactus mix or a mix that is specific for native plants that encourages good drainage. Kind of mix that in to loosen up the soil. We initially mulch these gardens to control weeds and help establish plants. And then we mulch with leaves afterwards because they're free. If people don't like the way that looks, I always tell people to use the skim coat of wood bark across the top, 1 chip thick, to give you the look of nice bark mulch. Leave some bare areas of dirt for nesting bees. Most native bees, about 70%, nest underground, which is kind of cool. So, because remember, you are going to have these organisms coming to your garden, guaranteed. So, you know, you will be engaging with these creatures. Don't use leaf blowers in your planted areas. If you do use a leaf blower to clean off hardscape, try to use an electrically powered blower, which reduces fumes and emissions. And those fumes and emissions interfere with so many things. The smell of them interferes with the way that insects find plants. And then don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides, which actually get into the soil and disrupt the development of all kinds of organisms that will come to have lunch in your garden. Another thing too, because they are coming and eating things, they will be reproducing. And, you know, that's just what happens. That's the good thing. And so because they will be reproducing, consider providing some nesting and shelter for these insects. Many insects spend a lot of time as an egg or a larva. Some can be that way for months or years, like 17-year cicadas. Thank God we don't have those. And the adult lifespan, which the ones that we see, it's pretty short for many insects. It's basically long enough to reproduce, and that's it. So your successful garden will have all of these, which will be eaten by the birds. And trust me, you will have a lot of birds coming to eat these. Pruning decisions, like I said, I prune very little, not because I'm completely lazy. It's because that just because we think something looks unsightly doesn't mean that it doesn't have a function. And so, for example, male bees don't have nests to sleep in at night. They often can be found sleeping in flowers or on a dry stem, like this male digger bee, who has grasped this dry stem with his mouth parts and is having a nap in between his antics with the ladies. A number of species will nest inside hollow stems, such as this wasp, which eats bad insects. So if you're pruning things down that have hollow stems like that, and you feel the need to, leave about 1 foot at the bottom, because that's where insects will nest, and then they will do egg chambers in sequence up the stem. So if you do prune, sometimes I don't compost the stems. I'll just leave them in a pile in case I pruned something that was a nest by accident. Again, you know, pruning, it's not because I'm lazy, it's just because I have a different aesthetic sense. So these are in my home garden. These are asters. I didn't prune them, just left them because there's these fluffy seed heads. And sure enough, the fluff is used by hummingbirds to create their nest. Once you see a hummingbird collecting this fluff, you may see things like this differently. So it's not an unsightly dry twig with a fluffy bit of messiness at the end. This is actually, the function of it is to provide materials for other things to use. Never assume that what you leave in the garden is completely useless. Nature doesn't let a lot of things go to waste. And so if you're patient, or if you just want to be lazy, maybe like me, nature will reveal the beauty of the purpose of these things to you, even if they're not apparent at the beginning. Oops, jumped forward here. So again, pruning. This Verbena lilacina at the Primrose Garden. I only prune to keep this out of the sidewalk, and then the old stems provide scaffolding for new growth and provide lots of complexity of spaces and cover for other animals to get in there and hide. I don't see it as ugly. I see it as a complex space. And remember, complexity is one of those things that makes an environment much more resilient. I provide complexity. This is at the Gwynda Street Garden. We have a pile of logs that was donated. And again, lots of little niches there for additional nesting sites. I use bamboo stakes in the garden, my own home garden, for staking up things. And sure enough, a leafcutter bee found the hollow there to be just what she wanted, to have some nesting. So leave the leaves. The birds will find lots of insects to eat in those. You know, I literally do as little as possible with leaves. I just leave them. Their leaves are ecosystem gold in the environment. They help prevent weeds. They absorb water like a sponge. Remember that moisture is really important. They help filter water. They hold in soil moisture. They insulate the soil. They keep it cool. So I'm giving everybody permission to leave your leaves just where they are, except maybe on the patio. They're really an incredible thing and will make your garden that much more successful. Plants and seedlings will grow up through the leaf litter, which is then covered by new growth. So we even have like an oak seedling coming up through leaves and other seedlings. This is at the Primrose Garden, other things coming up through leaf litter. And that's what it looks like when things come up. So, you know, again, I don't see leaves as being unattractive. I see them as having a function in the environment, which is to provide that complexity that makes for a really resilient garden. Bumblebee queens overwinter in leaf piles. Especially attractive are those oak leaves. And again, you know, some places you'll have some bare soil. That's fine. You will probably have some bees nesting underground. And so this is a colony that we have at the Island Drive Garden. And they don't have to go far for food. They've set up housekeeping, and it's a very stable colony. Again, avoid creating an ecological trap. If you're using native plants, it will be very attractive to these insects. Food is the great equalizer. Everything has to eat. And so among the goals for your native plant gardens are to optimize the reproductive success for the insects that use them. So if you connect your habitats, let's say you have 2 planting beds, connect those. It'll make it easier for the bees to go between them. Reduce your light pollution at night. Blackout curtains on windows or motion sensors or yellow lights at night will help. There are more moth species than butterfly species. We don't really know that because we don't go out at night and look at moths, but we see a lot of butterflies in the daytime, more moths, so a lot more caterpillars. We want those caterpillars to make baby birds. Again, leaving the leaves, eliminating use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, and then trying to reduce the exhaust from gas-powered devices as much as possible. So finally, now that we're ready to plant that native garden, I think among the other ecosystem services, the more that you understand these interrelationships in natures, you will learn how to optimize the productivity of your native plant garden, which will lead to an abundance of life, as well as enhancing your appreciation and seeing what your role is in caring for nature's complex beauty. And we just end it with a beautiful bumblebee here, again on Gilead capitata, super easy plant to grow, and then a masked bee on an Erysimum species. Just incredible creatures, so much beauty you can't even imagine. And it's ridiculously easy to get. You just have to plant native plants. And I will stop sharing my screen so we can take some questions.
Wow, thank you. That was so beautiful. So many beautiful plants, really inspiring. If I may start, I would love to ask a question. I
Sure.
like the way you gave the option for, starting off with graph paper and designing and really plotting it out. I think that's great.
Yes.
But I'm like, if I'm really eager to start and you said you could just plant a tree if it's too
Yeah.
overwhelming, or maybe it's going to take time to do that. Is there a good time of the year to plant a tree here? Or can you, I know you also said it's kind of colder now, and so the planting season is kind of key right now. Is there a good time to plant a tree? Or can you plant anytime?
So you can plant anytime.
Mhm.
Um, we have such a great climate here in California. The most success, though, is really during the fall and winter when things are cool and moist. That way the roots can get established. When the soil heats up, as it does in the summertime, it dries out. And then when you're watering, the soil becomes wet and warm, which is not what native plants like. They don't like warm, moist soil. And so it becomes a little bit more tricky, but you certainly can plant them. Some people, to try to avoid the issues of things being too hot when they're planting, will actually put up a shade structure over their tree to help it get established. I've done that myself. I actually have a big umbrella over my big leaf maple that I'm trying to establish in the backyard. Um, it doesn't like to be in full sun, but I have some other trees that I need to get bigger before I can let it be in the shade of those trees. So I'm actually shading it. So there are these little tricks that you can use, but you can plant anytime. Just be aware that you're probably going to be more successful during the cooler planting season, which is probably between April and, really middle of June, maybe, unless it gets super hot.
Great. Thank you. So I have some time.
Yes, yes, you
Awesome.
do.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Now, would you, I see there's a few questions in the Q&A. Would you like to address them? Can you see them, Juanita? Or do you want me to read them, or what works for you?
So I just pulled those up.
Okay.
So I'm seeing a question from Eric at the top here. Gophers, moles, and voles in my yard really love the plants in my yard, and I'm feeding them pretty well. How do I keep them from destroying the native landscape that I'm putting in without killing them and putting cages over everything? Um, so uh, cages underground, to keep them from getting in and destroying any sort of like bulbs or corms or any sort of root structure that you have, are good to do. And, my problem is I don't have the underground things. I have the squirrels that dig things up. So I will cage things until they are established. Then I remove the cage from the top. Um, the other thing that you can do is you can put up a raptor perch so that you can invite hawks to come and hang out at your yard to feed upon those. So that's one way to do it. So another question here is a garden on a busy street a concern for pollinators and birds? Um, you know, yes and no. So there are a couple of things about this, and because we're actually taking the Primrose Garden and the Gwynda Street Garden on Embarcadero, and we have um, the area between the street and the sidewalk, which is 10 feet wide of planting strip. Right now, it's nothing but ivy in most places. We're going to connect these gardens and create a corridor. And so that's a concern. But, you know, the way that insects navigate uh, the air actually for insects is more like water for them because of their small size. And so they're actually pushed back a little bit by the force of wind from cars. And um, it really is going to depend on what's next to those gardens. So the way that I've designed certain gardens, like the Gwynda Street Garden, is to pull those pollinators back away from the street. Um, a lot of pollinators won't go very far from the food. They will like to nest literally 10 feet away from their food. And that's actually good because the closer they are to the food, to their nesting site, the more bees that they can make. Female bees, the solitary bees, which are most of the bee species, um, like a leaf cutter, for example, one that will cut a leaf and line her brood cell with it, can lay up to 3 eggs per day, and she only lives a couple of weeks. So, she doesn't want to spend a lot of time flying from food to nest really far away. If she can be really close, um, then she can make more babies because she's, the time crunch of like commuting back and forth is lessened. Um, so, you know, it probably is better to plant those things and not worry about the traffic than for things to go extinct because you're worried about the traffic. I would say go ahead and plant it up. Um, there are things that fly around at night that aren't going to be bothered as much by the traffic. Um, you know, I wouldn't let traffic do anything to deter me from doing that. I just like to provide a larger area connected to something that's next to the street that they can go to to get refuge from those things. Do I consider any plants to be weeds? Yes. Non-native plants that like to uh, drive me crazy. Non-native thistles are annoying. Um, Non-native oxalis gets into things. Pampas grass, one seed head has like 50,000 seeds on it that wreaks havoc. There are a lot of plants that are actually just really just awful pests and get in and do things. Native plants, some of them can be a little bit weedy, but you can transplant them and move those around. Um, some native plants are really vigorous if they're happy and can be kind of thugs, but um, if a plant's not in the proper place, then it's a weed. Do I encourage honeybees even though they're not native? I try not to encourage them. One of the and there are a couple of reasons for that. The science shows us that when you have honeybees living in urban areas, will decrease the numbers of other insects because of competition for resources. And so I will plant things that they find harder to use. Honeybees can't do something that bumblebees can do really well, which is buzz pollinate. And there are a number of plants that are only buzz pollinated. What that means is that the pollen is inside the anther of the plant, and so it only comes out through these little holes in the anther. So a bee has to shake it at a right vibration to get it to come out, to shake out. And honeybees can't do that. One of the plants that is buzz pollinated are poppies. I don't see a ton of honeybees on poppies, so I really encourage poppies because that actually helps the natives. And actually, native bees prefer native plants, even though honeybees will use some of the same plants. Um, I try to provide an abundance so that everybody is happy. Um, but that's the only way I try to control um, things in the favor of native bees, is to provide some buzz pollinated things that they prefer. Are there non-native plants? Let's see, Allison says, that not technically native to California that are compatible in California native environments, plants from Mexico, Southwest US that are showing up more and more in local nurseries. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, there are some, there are like the salvias, there's some salvias from the Southwest and stuff like that that are showing up. Um, eh, I'm not really enamored with those because I don't know if they're really going to um, support the organisms that are already present in the environment, that are used to eating what's already present in this environment. And we want to support the things that are here. And with hundreds of species available, um, you know, that are locally native, it's probably best to start with those. I mean, if you find something that you like, and you want to try it, I would say go ahead with that. The research shows that if you wanted to uh, have native plants for bird purposes to keep bird populations happy, you need about 70% of your plants in your yard to provide enough food um, to keep birds alive so they can feed their young. So I'm not totally against them, um, but it's like, I want my gardens to be as resilient and as productive as possible. How would you recommend getting rid of grass to get started? So there are a couple different ways. You can do sheet mulching, which is basically putting piles of cardboard down, like, like like 3 or 4 layers of it, wet it down, and then put some nice thick mulch on the top. And you can actually make a hole and then plant right in there. That is a great way to get going, and create little islands and slowly like take over your lawn and create those islands of goodness. Let's see. Can you please talk about incorporating edible options into a native garden? Oh yes, of course. Everybody's got to eat. Food is a great equalizer. So in my home garden, I have the native huckleberries, the Vaccidium ovatum, which the bumblebees love. They have tubular flowers that have super tasty nectar. And you can take those huckleberries and make a nice little liqueur out of them, the huckle chuckle, as we like to call it. Native strawberries that you can plant. There's native blackberries. There's native raspberries that you can plant. Um, I'm trying to think of the things that I have in my own garden that I eat. Um, there's like hazelnuts are native. Those are super tasty and they're really great keystone species. So feeding the humans as
So
well.
where do you find some of those? Did you go to the website that you recommended earlier and search for those, or?
Yeah, so Calscape is great. So
Hellscape.
if you find the plant that you like, it's like it shows you what nurseries that have that plant. Then you can go to the nurseries websites, and most of them have an inventory list and show you what they have on hand. It's like,
Awesome.
I know, the interwebs, who knew? It's super easy. So there are a lot of different things that people can eat. So those are some edible options. I'm trying to think. At the Island Drive Garden, I started. I put in some native strawberries as well as the black cap raspberry that I started from seed, because that's a plant from my childhood and I'm kind of reliving that. So, you know, uh, again, you can certainly put in as many native edibles as possible. Um, there are a lot of them. Let's see. How do you know which mature non-native plants to get rid of in the yard? For example, wisteria. Um, so you can do a search to see if it's native or non-native. If you have something that's super mature that you want to get rid of, so I always say when you're transforming your yard from non-native things to native things, go slowly, because those things have had a function in the ecosystem for a while, and so you don't want to like change things really quickly. Um, like scrape all the dirt off and start over. I mean, that's an option. I like to go at it kind of bit by bit at a time. And, as I'm slowly getting more natives in, I'm thinking, yeah, do I really need that X there? Or can I replace it with something? So one of the things that we had in our front yard was this big shrub of these yellow flowers called a marguerite, I think. And this thing was like, I don't know how many decades old, hideous shrub, you know. So that went out, and another hedge of carpenteria went in, which is a nice evergreen shrub that looks very much, when it blooms with these beautiful white flowers, looks like a camellia. And so it's like, yes. So, so look for something that could be a substitute for wisteria. There are lots of vines that are native. And you could maybe plant a native vine along next to the wisteria and slowly kind of prune that wisteria back and back and back until it's a nub. And then what happens to that later, no one knows.
Yeah, that seems like really good advice, because you're
Yes.
right. If you wipe everything out, then your whatever was attracted to there originally is going to be
Yes.
lost.
Yeah. Use a gentle hand. And so
Mm-hmm.
I will plant, if I have a very small oak tree, I'll plant that next to a nasty camphor tree that has a limited lifespan. It's on its way out. And that way that tree can get going while the other one kind of, plants have lifespans. Um, and if they're starting to look kind of scraggly, that's the time to find a replacement for it. And, over time, as that thing dies, you can prune it, prune it, prune it, prune it until like it's like a stump, saw it off at the base, and then you have like this other thing that's already there. And nobody was the wiser. How can I attract more ladybugs to my garden? Leave your aphids. They love to eat them. And not only will they eat aphids, but hummingbirds eat aphids as well. So I always think of aphids as the soft-shelled crab of the garden. So I don't see things the way other people see things. Um, let's see. You had mentioned honeybees and how they weren't native to California. They're not native to the United States or to the Western world. Um, are they competition to our local bees? Yes, they are. And they're competition for a lot of other insects as well. They do cause decreases in all kinds of other insects. So it's a problem, and they spread disease that they have. So, um, you know, it's an issue, but, I try to make the buffet big and abundant and let them fight it out. Okay. Let's see. What's recommended under and near a large redwood with lots of shallow roots? Oh, redwoods love community. So if you go up to like Armstrong redwoods or any of the redwood forests, take a look around, see what's growing under them. Things like our native sorrels grow under them. Vaccinium ovatum grows under them. Plant some small stuff to start with. Our native ginger, Asarum caudatum, grows under there. The Woodwardia fimbriata, the giant chain fern, grows under them. And plant a little one, plant a tiny 4-inch pot and let it make its introductions to those redwood roots, because redwoods like community, like all these other plants. They like to have their neighbors in with them. So those are just a few, but there's certainly more. Lots of bulbs grow under them, trilliums grow under them, lilies of all kinds. It could be quite the wonderland under a redwood. Let's see. Is there a special consideration to plan around an established non-native tree, e.g. city-owned streetside tree? Yes. So, the magnolias and the camphor trees and stuff like that. So, look at the street trees, see, kind of try to judge where it is in its lifespan, and then plant accordingly around it. If you're thinking that it might need to be replaced in a few years, that might be something to go in. And then, see where the root system is on some of these things. I mean, some of these street trees just have these massive root systems that make it difficult to plant anything. And that can be really annoying. But find a space where there aren't any roots and, plant some things that spread by runners, I would suggest, to grow under those. Some things like things that I like to plant are, and there's a great patch of this at the Island Drive Garden. And the name of it is escaping me, but things that spread by runners are great things to plant under street trees, because they will compete with the roots of those trees and have a conversation about who's boss. It's just how plants are. You know, people think about plants as inanimate objects, and it's not the case at all. These things are, you know, they go at a different time scale, but they have conversations with each other. Can you recommend nurseries in San Mateo that sell native plants? I live in San Bruno. Bay Natives is a great one. There's one that's the Mission, I think Mission Blue Nursery near Brisbane is another good one. Another one I like to go to is Yerba Buena Nursery. That's in Half Moon Bay. That's maybe a little drive. Those are some that I know of right off the bat that are close by. Let's see, I have a specific question about planting around a persimmon tree. It currently has azaleas under it. I want to remove those. I heard they're not good for the soil. Could removing it affect the persimmon tree? You know, I would remove a few at a time and see how it goes. And, you know, don't shock the tree because those roots have had a conversation for a number of years. It's like, remove one at a time and replace it. It's like nothing to see here. I'm just going to stick this in, pull this one out. You know, use a gentle hand. Side note, I have a wisteria that grew so big it had 100-foot long vines and grew up into and killed a 100-foot oak tree. I cut it all the way back to the trunk and ground. It's already back to 4 feet and bushy in a few months. Yes, it's wisteria. Yes, wisteria, if it had legs, run, right? They can be quite vigorous. Yeah, wisteria. I mean, there are so many other things to plant other than wisteria. But anyway, somebody said, we'd like to remove a privet tree. Yes. Any recommendations on doing this ourselves or hiring a tree removal company? You probably don't, unless it's like 40 feet tall, you probably don't need a tree removal company. I don't know, you know, depending on how big it is, I don't know that I would remove it myself. And, you know, if you're older or younger, you know, what you want to take on. You know, I would get a quote from a landscape company to do it. You know, it's not that I'm lazy. It's just that this heavy physical labor is best left to professionals with the right tools and who do this for a living. Do you have advice for arranging things so pets and children are less likely to end up getting stung by bees and wasps? Yes. So don't worry about the native bees. They are not really interested in stinging you. It's honeybees that are aggressive because they have a hive to protect. And so those workers out getting the nectar and the pollen for the hive, they are like soldiers. They will sacrifice themselves, which will happen if they sting you, and because their stinger comes off and it pulls up their guts with it and it kills the bee. Now, wasps, remember wasps, their goal is to find other insects to feed their babies. They're not like bees that are peaceable creatures that feed their babies pollen and nectar. They're vegetarians, where wasps are carnivores. So if you want to keep the wasps away from like an event that you have outside, is to put a little pile of raw meat far away from things. They will go to that because they're carnivores or interested in that. You know, so you can have, if you want to have places that kids can play so that they're not going to be stung, and if they step on things, certainly that's a problem. So you'll want to plant maybe some things that don't have a lot of blooms on them where they're walking. But the other things that are like shrubs and perennials and stuff like that, I get all up in the face of bees and other insects, and I have never been stung, ever. And I get this close to them. They're really not interested in what you're doing. But I don't mess with them. Children, you know, they're curious about insects. But if you can make sure that they're not walking on places where there are a lot of blooms and you see a lot of bees and wasps, that's probably the best way to avoid some of those issues. Are bottle brush trees native? No. No, they are not. So,
Well, we sure had a number of great questions. I want to just thank everyone for, engaging in, asking some really great questions. I think our audience has, learned a lot. I guess I would just say one last question. So if you're an amateur like me, is there any bit of advice that you could just give that would just sort of help me to just really get started?
plant a tree.
Yep.
Plant an oak. If you don't have room for a big valley oak, plant a scrub oak.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great way to get started. If you say, well, I don't really have room for a tree, then you can plant a shrub. And the manzanita, the Arctostaphylos, are great shrubs to plant, or a ceanothus. So plant one thing, or if you're curious about annual seeds, we're kind of getting out of the time to sow those seeds. Try growing some things from seed. There's like whatever piques your interest, it's like, oh, that seems interesting. Give it a try. I mean, you almost can't do it wrong. And native plants are like magic. It's incredible the difference that it's made. In our neighborhood, the Primrose Garden is actually at the entrance to our neighborhood. It's about 5,000 square feet of plants that are it's crammed full of plants, and I'm always adding more. And the bird population in our neighborhood has increased remarkably. It's amazing how it works. It's like the native plants, once you get everything in there, it's like this self-assembling machine, because things start getting attracted because it's food, right? And who doesn't like to eat? So
Sounds wonderful. Yes, I agree. Well, I think we are just about out of time. So I just want to take a minute to thank you so much, Juanita, for your expertise, for your wonderful presentation, and for just spending your time this evening. And thank you to all our participants for spending their time for this webinar. And again, we will be sharing it. So hopefully you can forward it to your friends who haven't seen it, or watch it again if you'd like. I will just thank everyone and hope you have a nice evening.
Thanks, Andrea.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everybody. Oh, it's really such a treat to share everything with everybody. And just, I would just encourage everybody to try this, because the transformation that happens, it really is, it's very magical. I wish everybody could experience it, because it's just an amazing thing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
A pleasure always. Take care.
You too. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.